Picture it. The sun has barely cleared the rooftops of Rome, yet the forum already seethes with noise. Merchants call out their wares, olive oil from Hispania, spices from the east, while senators in white togas glide past on their way to morning business. The air smells of bread fresh from communal ovens, mingled with the metallic tang of bronze coins changing hands. Amid this daily rhythm of the empire's beating heart, a ripple of silence spreads like a shadow passing over the crowd. All eyes turn toward the marble colonnade. There, in a shaft of golden light, walks the emperor himself. Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, lord of an empire stretching from the misty coasts of Britannia to the burning deserts of Syria, strolls with the unhurried gait of a man for whom time itself is an obedient servant. Draped in Tyrian purple, crowned with laurel, his presence commands both reverence and fear. Yet today the murmurs are not for him. They are for the figure at his side. She is striking, skin like polished ivory, a cascade of gold-threaded hair, eyes that seem to catch the sun. Her gown shimmers with woven silver, the hem whispering over the worn stones. At a glance, she could be the Empress of Rome herself. But the whispers winding through the forum are darker than admiration. Because they know this woman was once a boy named Sporus. Some avert their eyes, unwilling to risk the emperor's wrath. Others stare openly, the corners of their mouths tightening in revulsion or pity. Whispers bloom in every corner, darting from ear to ear. That's the one. The boy who looks like her. The one Nero remade. The crowd's curiosity is tinged with dread, for all of Rome knows the emperor's grief, and the monstrous way he has tried to cure it. Nero's hand rests possessively on the figure's arm as they walk, as though the contact itself will anchor this fragile illusion in reality. To the casual observer, it might seem the gesture of a loving husband. But to those who know the truth, it is the grip of a man who has turned love into obsession, grief into madness, and another human being into a living replica of the woman he destroyed. In this moment, the forum is more than a marketplace. It is a theater, and all of Rome is the audience. The actors play their parts flawlessly. The emperor beaming, the bride demure, the crowd pretending not to see the tragedy stitched into every fold of her gown. But beneath the bright morning sky, something cold runs through the stones. An unspoken understanding that this is not simply another imperial scandal. It is a glimpse into the black heart of absolute power, where a rulers can refashion flesh, identity, and destiny as easily as one might rearrange a statue. And so begins the story of Sporus, a boy whose life would become one of the most disturbing parables of Rome's imperial age. It is not merely a tale of cruelty, though cruelty is here in abundance. It is a study in how grief can twist into something unrecognizable, how a man who ruled millions could be enslaved to a ghost of his own making, and how the most gilded palace can be a prison with walls made of silk. Before the forum whispers and the silken prison of Sporus' life, there was a time when Nero seemed destined to be remembered as a savior, not a tyrant. He was only 16 when the Senate declared him emperor in 54 AD, the youngest to ever sit upon the throne of the Caesars. Rome was still basking in the stability left by his stepfather and adoptive father, Emperor Claudius. The city's streets, bustling with trade and prosperity, hummed with cautious optimism. Many believed this fresh-faced youth, educated in rhetoric, poetry, music, might herald a new golden age. In those first years, they weren't wrong. Nero lowered taxes on the poor, funded grand spectacles in the circus and amphitheater, and poured money into public works. He championed the arts, even daring to step onto the stage himself. An unthinkable act for an emperor, but one that delighted the masses. Grain was affordable, festivals plentiful, and the city's fountains ran with clean water. To the common citizen, Nero was not just their ruler. He was a performer in the grand drama of Rome itself. He sang, he raced chariots, he recited poetry under the torchlight of banquets. Aristocrats might sneer at the impropriety, but the people adored him. For a time, even the Senate tolerated his eccentricities, reassured by the stability of his advisors, men like the philosopher Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus, who tempered the impulses of their young ruler. Yet, under the veneer of this bright beginning, cracks were already forming. Nero had grown up in the shadow of court intrigues, where daggers could be sheathed in smiles and poison hidden in cups of wine. He had seen his mother, Agrippina the Younger, bend the machinery of empire to place him on the throne. He knew, perhaps too well, that loyalty in Rome was a performance, and the emperor himself was both the stage and the prize. With each year, the pressure of the diadem pressed harder against his temples. Every audience was a test. Every senator could be a conspirator. Every servant might whisper in the wrong ear. In the palaces of the Palatine Hill, surrounded by marble and gold, Nero began to feel the cold touch of isolation. A ruler in an empire of 60 million souls, yet utterly alone. For a while, the guiding hands of his advisors kept him steady. But absolute power is a corrosive metal. It wears away whatever human alloy it touches. By his late 20s, the bright promise of the young emperor had begun to tarnish. His pleasures grew more extravagant, his temper shorter, and the lines between public duty and personal desire blurred into a single, shifting shadow. Still, no one, not the Senate, not the people, not even Nero himself, could have predicted that his descent into darkness would be hastened not by rebellion or political defeat, but by love. She arrived in his life like a spark falling into dry tinder, beautiful, self-assured, and already versed in the dangerous art of survival at the imperial court. Poppæa Sabina was no naive ornament of Rome's aristocracy. Born into wealth and influence, she had inherited not only beauty, but also the political instincts of a seasoned statesman. Her skin was said to gleam like alabaster, her hair a rich cascade of gold, and her eyes held that rare quality the Romans called gravitas, a presence that could command attention without a word. When Nero first laid eyes on her, he was still bound in a loveless marriage to Octavia, the dutiful daughter of his predecessor Claudius. Octavia was dignified, chaste, and politically valuable, but she lacked the vitality that now captivated the emperor's gaze. Poppæa was everything Octavia was not: vivacious, witty, and utterly unafraid of the limelight. Where Octavia preferred the quiet dignity of the background, Poppæa seemed born for the center of the room, her laughter drawing eyes as surely as her beauty. The court had seen affairs before. Roman high society was a web of whispered infidelities and calculated liaisons. But this was different. Nero did not merely desire Poppæa. He began to orbit her, as if pulled by some inescapable gravity. To Poppæa, the attention of the emperor was both an opportunity and a risk. She knew well the hazards of a powerful man's obsession, yet she also recognized what it could buy: influence, security, and a place in the most dangerous game Rome had to offer, the game of imperial politics. The affair began discreetly enough, hidden in the folds of court entertainments and private gatherings. But Rome was a city where secrets slipped like sand through the fingers, carried on the tongues of slaves and senators alike. Before long, the whispers reached Octavia, and the marriage, already a hollow shell, grew colder still. Poppæa, for her part, was no passive mistress. She understood that beauty without strategy was a fleeting coin in the imperial treasury. She cultivated allies, made herself indispensable in conversation, and began to influence the emperor's tastes, from the cut of his robes to the musicians he favored. Each gesture, each glance, was a deliberate move in a game of survival where one wrong note could mean exile or worse. And yet, despite her careful maneuvering, she underestimated one thing: the depth of Nero's capacity for possession. This was not mere attraction, nor even love as most would recognize it. It was something hungrier, something that could not be satisfied by companionship alone. In Nero's eyes, Poppæa was not just a woman. She was an ideal to be owned, preserved, and guarded against the world. Soon, the whispers of scandal became the clang of public spectacle, and the emperor's next move would shake the stability of the court to its foundations. Once Nero's desire for Poppæa took root, it grew like ivy, winding around every part of his life until nothing else could be seen beneath it. At first, his gestures were those of a lover eager to impress. Rare jewels from India, silks from China, perfumes from Arabia, each more costly than the last. But these were not the offerings of courtly romance. They were the tribute of a man determined to make possession visible. In the markets of Rome, word spread of gifts so lavish they could have funded the construction of an entire aqueduct. Nero imported sapphires the size of a thumb from the mines of Sri Lanka, incense from the mountains of Arabia, and embroidered garments from Parthia whose threads shimmered like molten gold in torchlight. Each object, no matter how extravagant, was a message to the world. This woman is mine, and no one may touch her. Then came the guards. At public events, Poppæa was never without an entourage of tall, armed men whose task was not so much to protect her from danger as to shield her from the gaze of other men. They flanked her in the imperial box at the amphitheater, walked her through the forum, and stood silent at the doors of her private apartments. Even the senators took note. These were not the protections afforded to an empress, but the precautions of a jealous owner. And Nero's reach extended beyond the physical. Slowly, Poppæa found herself cut off from old friends and family, replaced by attendants whose loyalty lay entirely with the emperor. The walls of her world began to close in, the courtyards and gardens of the palace becoming both sanctuary and prison. In this gilded confinement, Nero's obsession grew more theatrical. He commissioned portraits of Poppæa in every conceivable pose. Crowned as a goddess, reclining as Venus, riding in a chariot drawn by snow-white horses. Sculptors were ordered to immortalize her in marble, not only for public temples but for Nero's private chambers, where her image could watch him even in solitude. Some nights, he would simply sit and watch her, hours passing as servants kept the lamps burning. He would study the curve of her cheek, the fall of her hair, the way the light shifted across her skin, as though by memorizing every detail he could fix her in time, preserve her forever against the decay that claimed all mortal things. This was no longer love. It was ownership gilded in poetry. And while some at court envied Poppæa's hold over the emperor, others saw it for what it was. The first threads of a net that would tighten until it strangled them both. If Poppæa had been a timid ornament, her story might have ended differently. But she was neither meek nor blind to the dangers of her position. In the flickering light of the imperial court, she played her part with precision. Sweet words for the emperor, sharp glances for those who opposed her. But beneath it all, she maneuvered with the caution of a general on a battlefield. She used Nero's favor to elevate her family, arranging advantageous marriages for relatives and securing titles for allies. Her apartments became a quiet center of influence where petitions were whispered, decisions nudged, and loyalties carefully measured. Those who sought imperial favor often found that the surest path to Nero's ear was through Poppæa's smile. Yet her strength was also her vulnerability. Unlike most in the court, who had learned to treat the emperor's moods like a treacherous tide, never contradicting, always yielding, Poppæa retained her independence of thought. She spoke her mind. She criticized decisions she believed unwise. She even dared to mock his artistic performances when they failed to meet her high standards. At first, this seemed to enchant him further. Nero was accustomed to flattery so constant it became meaningless. Poppæa's frankness was intoxicating, a mark, perhaps, of her honesty and her refusal to treat him as a god. But there is a thin line between fascination and irritation, and Nero was not a man who bore criticism well. The court began to sense the shifting air. One day she could be seen riding beside him in the imperial chariot, crowned with roses. The next, he would stalk away from her in a public rage. Senators learned to watch their words when her name arose, for the wrong remark might be praised one week and punished the next, depending on Nero's mood. Still, Poppæa did not shrink. Her beauty gave her value, her intellect gave her leverage, and her position beside the emperor gave her a platform unlike any other woman in Rome. But in using that platform, she risked the one thing she could not control, his temper. What neither of them knew was that the same force that had carried her to the heights of the empire would soon drag her into its most fatal depths. All it would take was one argument at the wrong time, in the wrong place, with the wrong man. It was late summer when the thread finally snapped. The air in Rome hung heavy with heat, the marble floors of the palace radiating warmth even at night. Nero had returned from one of his performances in the theater, flushed with triumph, expecting praise and adoration. The crowd had cheered him, of course they had. But for Nero, the opinion that mattered most was Poppæa's. She received him in her private apartments, wearing a gown of pale silk that shimmered in the lamplight. But instead of the smile he anticipated, her expression was cool. She spoke plainly, perhaps too plainly, about the performance. The song had dragged, the gestures were too exaggerated, the audience's applause, she hinted, might not have been entirely sincere. The words fell like stones into the still water of Nero's mind. For a moment, he was silent, his gaze fixed on her in disbelief. Then came the questions, sharp-edged and low. Who had told her this? Did she think herself a better judge of art than the emperor? Was she mocking him? Poppæa did not retreat. Perhaps she believed her honesty was a privilege of their closeness. Perhaps she thought she could calm him with reason. But Nero's pride was a fragile vessel, and that night it shattered. His voice rose, the arguments turned to accusations, the accusations to shouts. Servants in the corridor froze, their ears pressed to the walls, too afraid to intervene. The quarrel spilled from words into motion. Nero, in a fit of ungoverned rage, struck her. The blow was not measured. It was the lashing out of a man for whom boundaries had ceased to exist. Poppæa fell, the breath driven from her body, pain blooming across her side. In that moment, the room seemed to still, the silence punctuated only by her ragged breathing. Whether he realized the full weight of what he had done is lost to history. Some accounts claim she was with child, and the injury proved fatal. Others say the damage was slower, a sickness born of that single act that ended her life days later. What is certain is that within the palace walls, the laughter and music that had once surrounded Poppæa were gone. Her chambers, once filled with the scent of Arabian perfume, stood quiet. The woman who had risen from the salons of Rome to the pinnacle of imperial power was gone, reduced to a name whispered in both awe and warning. And for Nero, there would be no escaping the shadow she left behind. Even an emperor cannot strike at beauty without marring his own reflection. In the days after Poppæa's death, the palace became a place of whispers. Servants moved like shadows, speaking only in murmurs, their eyes darting to the closed doors of her once busy apartments. No one dared to speak of the argument, at least not where Nero could hear, but the truth clung to the air like the heavy scent of her perfumes, impossible to banish. Nero, for his part, behaved as though reality could be bent to his will. He ordered her body embalmed in the finest myrrh and cinnamon, her hair arranged just so, her lips painted the color of pomegranate seeds. The funeral was a spectacle, as much for the living as for the dead. Ivory chariots, purple-draped litters, musicians whose laments echoed through the forum. The emperor himself delivered the eulogy, his voice breaking as he spoke of her beauty, her virtue, her place beside him as the jewel of Rome. It was a strange theater. Public grief from the man most believed had caused her death. Yet in Nero's mind, love and destruction were not opposites. To him, she had been his possession, and her loss was as much an affront to his pride as it was to his heart. But mourning did not still the empire's tongue. Senators spoke of omens, lightning over the Tiber, statues cracking without cause, a pale figure glimpsed in the gardens at night. Rome, they said, was not a city that forgot, and neither, perhaps, was Poppæa. Some claimed Nero grew restless in the months that followed, refusing to sleep in the same chamber 2 nights in a row. He spoke to her as though she stood beside him, summoned painters to capture her likeness yet again, and swore he felt her presence in the cool night air. Others whispered that he believed she watched him from the afterlife, judging his every deed. Whether haunted by guilt, grief, or the simple vanity of having lost his most prized treasure, Nero never escaped her shadow. In the end, Poppæa's beauty became immortal, not through the marble statues he commissioned, nor the tales sung by court poets, but through the warning her life left behind. For in Rome, power could raise you higher than the gods, but one man's wrath could dash you to the stones in a single heartbeat. Years after her death, when the tides of Roman politics had swept Nero himself into ruin, Poppæa's name still carried weight, though not the kind carved into monuments or sung in public hymns. She lived on in the whispers of women in the imperial court, a story told half in awe, half in warning. Beware the heights to which beauty can lift you, for the fall is swifter still. Her likeness endured in marble busts, their smooth white faces unable to capture the living warmth of her gaze. Collectors kept her image not for piety, but for the dangerous glamour it represented. She was a relic of both Rome's excess and its cruelty. Historians argued over her character. To some, she was an ambitious manipulator who had traded affection for influence, a woman who played the imperial game and lost. To others, she was a victim of a man's ego, destroyed for daring to speak truth to power. The truth, as it so often does, likely lay somewhere between. In the darker corners of the city's memory, Poppæa's story took on a more spectral form. Travelers swore that on still summer nights, the sound of sandalwood beads could be heard clicking faintly along the marble corridors of the Palatine Hill. A faint scent of Arabian perfume would drift through the air, out of place, for no oil lamps burned there anymore. Some even claimed to have seen her. A tall woman in pale silk, her face both beautiful and sad, pausing as though searching for someone she could no longer reach. Rome had a way of turning its dead into myths, and Poppæa became one of them. She had walked in the emperor's shadow, shared his table, commanded his ear, and in the end, she had learned the one truth that even power could not rewrite. That in an empire ruled by the whims of one man, beauty was never a shield, only a target. Her name would be spoken for centuries, but never without the weight of tragedy. Decades passed. The empire shifted, emperors rose and fell, but in the quiet libraries of Rome, Poppæa's name still surfaced. Sometimes in the brittle scrolls of historians, sometimes in the hushed gossip of courtiers who saw their own fates reflected in hers. When poets spoke of her, they could never decide whether she was Venus reborn or Pandora with her box of temptations. To them, she was a paradox. Tender and cruel, calculating and impulsive, worshipped and destroyed. Her life became a mirror into which each generation projected its fears about women and power. Far from Rome, in the provinces, traveling bards told a more romantic tale. In their songs, Poppæa was the love Nero could not live without, a queen whose death cursed the emperor until his final day. They spoke of a vision Nero saw before his own downfall. Poppæa standing by the Tiber at dusk, her gown flowing like water, her eyes full of quiet accusation. Whether the vision was a dream, a ghost, or his guilt made flesh, the bards never agreed. But they always ended the story the same way, with Nero reaching for her and finding only air. Even in the centuries that followed the fall of the empire, her name clung to the edges of history. Medieval scholars, leafing through ancient chronicles, underlined her story as both a lesson and a warning. Painters of the Renaissance draped their models in pale silk and called them Poppæa Sabina, chasing a beauty that had already slipped into legend. By then, the truth of her life was almost impossible to separate from the myth. But perhaps that was her final triumph, to become unforgettable, even in death. For all the power Nero wielded, it was her memory, not his, that continued to haunt Rome long after their bones had turned to dust. And so Poppæa lived on, not in the echo of the emperor's voice, but in the perfume of a ghost, drifting through the corridors of time. In the far future, when Rome was nothing but ruins for scholars to pick over, the archaeologists found her name again. Not on grand inscriptions, those were for emperors, but etched small, almost secret, on the inside of a bronze hand mirror buried beneath volcanic ash. It was strange, they thought, that the mirror's polished surface still caught the light, as though it had been waiting for centuries to reflect a face again. Around its edge, in tiny script, was the dedication. To Poppæa, more radiant than the dawn. The inscription puzzled them. Was it a gift from a lover before Nero? A private token from a friend? Or an admirer she never knew? Or was it hers, inscribed by her own hand, a whisper to herself in the moments when the palace doors were closed and she could be more than an ornament? In the museum where it was eventually displayed, visitors often lingered by that mirror. Some swore they saw more than their own reflections in it, just the briefest glimpse of another woman's eyes, watching from behind the glass. The guides would laugh at such stories, of course. They would say, "It's only the play of light." But somewhere, Deep in the memory of the world, Poppæa's beauty still shifted in the shadows, bending history around her like the silk of her gowns. The empire was gone, Nero was gone, the marble palaces crumbled. But she, somehow, still had the last word. And if you listened closely, so closely that you could hear the faint rustle of a Roman summer night, you might catch her voice, soft as a sigh, saying only, "Remember me." Those who believed in omens said Poppæa had never truly left. Her name, once spoken only in Rome's marble halls, began to surface in the strangest places, scratched into the plaster of an abandoned villa, murmured in the dreams of senators' wives, woven into the verses of poets who swore they had never read her story. Some claimed she was not a ghost but a curse, a reminder from the past that beauty, once crowned, could become a blade. Young women of ambition would sometimes leave offerings at her rumored resting place. A sprig of myrtle, a silver pin, a vial of rose oil. They did not pray for her protection, but for her warning. Grant me the wisdom to survive what you could not. In the centuries after Nero's fall, when Rome's streets echoed with the boots of new conquerors, the story of Poppæa changed again. She became less a woman and more an idea. Temptation, fragility, vengeance. And yet, beneath all the layers of retelling, one truth remained unshaken. She had left an emperor haunted. It was said that on the eve of his final hours, cornered and desperate, Nero sat alone with a polished silver basin of water. Witnesses swore they saw him staring into it, whispering her name as if the surface might ripple and give her back to him. His last words were recorded as qualis artifex perio. What an artist dies in me. But some whispered that before he said those words, he had murmured another, Poppæa. And so her shadow outlived him, stretching across centuries, outlasting marble and empire alike. For Rome had many rulers, but only one Poppæa. Centuries later, when Rome was no longer the heart of the world, but a city of ruins and echoes, a team of restorers uncovered a half-buried statue in the Palatine rubble. Time had eaten away the drapery of stone and softened the once crisp lines of the figure, but the face, oh, the face, remained eerily intact. Her eyes were downcast. Her lips curved in that half-smile that left you unsure whether she forgave you or condemned you. There was no inscription, no imperial title, no clue to her identity. Only the faint trace of sandalwood scent clinging to the air when the dust was brushed away. The scholars argued. Some said it was Poppæa, preserved by an admirer in secret after her death. Others said it was a nameless goddess, and the likeness was only coincidence. But those who stood before the statue too long often found themselves shivering, though the air was warm. One restorer, working late into the evening, swore that when the moonlight struck the marble, the statue's eyes seemed to lift ever so slightly, as though acknowledging him. He never returned to the site after that night, and he would not say why. In the museum where the statue was eventually placed, visitors noticed that no matter where they stood, her gaze seemed to follow them. Some called it artistry, others called it a warning, because if you stared long enough, you might begin to feel as though she was not looking at you at all, but through you, and into the corridors of her lost empire. Long after the marble statue had been locked behind glass, another relic appeared. One so small and fragile that it was almost overlooked. It came from the excavation of a collapsed villa outside Pompeii. A delicate glass vial, stoppered with hardened resin, miraculously intact after nearly 2,000 years. Inside, a pale golden liquid still clung to the walls. Tests revealed it was a perfume, its base of myrrh and cinnamon still faintly aromatic, though faded to a ghost of its former strength. But what caught the scholar's attention was the etched script around the vial's neck. Sabina's own. There was no certainty that Sabina meant Poppæa Sabina. Names repeated through families, through households. And yet, when one curator dared to crack the ancient seal and draw in the scent, she felt something impossible to explain. Like standing in a sunlit garden, with silk brushing against her arm, and the sense that someone, just behind her, was watching with an amused smile. The vial was resealed and placed in the archives, but rumors persisted. Some said the perfume was Poppæa's final trace in the world, the one thing she had touched that time could not destroy. Others whispered that the scent was a snare, that anyone who inhaled it too deeply would dream of her for nights afterward, seeing her standing at the edge of their vision, never speaking, never fading. In the end, the relic was locked away entirely. The official reason was preservation. The real reason was fear. For beauty, as Rome had learned, could be as enduring and as dangerous as a curse. It began with the guards at the Capitoline Museum. They were used to late visitors, tourists who lingered in front of Caesar's busts or school groups that trailed behind their schedules. But this woman was different. She came only in the last hour before closing, always alone, always dressed in pale silk that whispered faintly when she walked. Her hair was the color of sunlit bronze, gathered high in a style no one had worn for 2 millennia. She spoke little, only nodding politely if addressed, and went straight to the same 2 objects, the marble statue with the half-smile and the sealed vial of perfume. She never touched them. She only stood there, gazing as though reacquainting herself with old friends, or perhaps old enemies. When the guards checked the guest log, her name was never written down. And on security footage, she never appeared at all. The cameras showed only an empty hall, though the guards swore they had seen her with their own eyes. The last time she came, the head guard, an older man who had worked there 20 years, decided to follow her when she left. He trailed her down the marble steps, out into the fading Roman dusk, past the ancient streets. But when she turned a corner, she was gone. In her place, resting on the stone ledge, was a single white rosebud, fresh as if cut that morning. And on one petal, faint but unmistakable, was the lingering trace of myrrh and cinnamon. No one has seen her since. But every year, on the anniversary of Poppæa's death, a single white rose appears in front of the statue. No one claims it. No one removes it. Years later, the Capitoline's archives were being reorganized, and a forgotten storage room was opened for the first time in decades. It was small, windowless, lined with tarnished bronze mirrors, most warped with age, their surfaces darkened like stagnant water. The catalog listed them as Roman domestic artifacts, but no records explained why they had been locked away. When the restoration team stepped inside, they noticed something strange. In the dim light, every mirror seemed to reflect the same figure, regardless of where you stood. A tall woman in pale drapery, her head slightly inclined, as though listening. Her features were blurred, but the curve of her lips suggested that half-smile, the one carved in marble upstairs. They assumed it was a trick of the tarnish, or a shared illusion brought on by poor lighting. But one young intern, curious, took a photo of the largest mirror with her phone. The image was empty, no figure at all. And yet, when she glanced back at the glass, the woman was closer. Her lips moved, though no sound came. The intern dropped the phone and ran. The mirrors were sealed again the next day, their inventory tags quietly removed from the public catalog. Officially, the room does not exist. But the night guard swears that when he passes that locked door after midnight, he hears a faint, deliberate tapping from inside, like fingernails on glass. Some say Poppæa's beauty was her power. Others now wonder if it was her trap, and if somewhere in those mirrors, she is still waiting. During a quiet winter renovation at the Capitoline, a curator decided to re-examine the base of Poppæa's marble statue. The pedestal had always been considered solid stone, but while dusting, she felt a faint seam along one corner. When pried open, it revealed a narrow cavity, and inside, a folded sheet of vellum so old it threatened to crumble at the touch. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate, ink faded to a rusty brown. It was in Latin, but the phrasing was strange, more personal than any public inscription. If you are reading this, then you have seen her face. You will dream of her within 3 nights. When she asks for your name, do not speak it. No signature, no date. The curator, unsettled, set the letter aside for translation and preservation. But when she returned the next morning, the vellum was gone. The pedestal cavity was empty, as though it had never been opened at all. Security cameras showed no one entering the archives overnight. The key to the room was still in her own pocket. A week later, she confided to a colleague that she had begun to dream, not in hazy fragments but vividly. The woman in the dreams wore pale silk and sandalwood perfume, and always stood just far enough away that her eyes could not be clearly seen. On the third night, the woman finally approached and asked in a low voice, "Who are you?" The curator woke before she could answer. She resigned from the museum that same week. She never explained why. After the curator's resignation, her replacement, a methodical archivist named Lorenzo, treated the rumors like dust on marble. Irritating but harmless. He prided himself on not believing in ghost stories. One late evening, while cataloging a shipment of minor relics, Lorenzo found an unlabeled box tucked behind a shelf. Inside was a single brass key, ornate and heavy, its bow shaped into an intricate laurel wreath. A small tag dangled from it, written in a spidery hand, "Do not use after dark." He assumed it was part of some forgotten display, but curiosity gnawed at him. The key didn't fit any modern museum locks, until he tried the disused door to the sealed mirror room. The key turned with a satisfying click. The air inside was cool and stale, as though it hadn't been disturbed for centuries. The mirrors, still draped in linen covers, stood like silent sentinels. Lorenzo, amused at his own recklessness, pulled one cloth away. The glass was not warped like the others. It was perfectly clear, showing his reflection exactly, except for one detail. Behind him stood a woman in pale silk, her head slightly tilted. Her lips curved into that unmistakable half-smile. Lorenzo spun around. No one was there. When he turned back, the mirror was empty. Just his own pale, startled face staring back at him. He quickly covered the mirror, locked the room, and shoved the key deep into his desk drawer. But that night, and every night after, he dreamed of soft footsteps following him through endless marble corridors. He never returned the key. It was late autumn when the first night guard quit without notice. He'd worked at the Capitoline for 12 years, unshaken by creaking floors, flickering lights, or even the occasional stray cat sneaking in from the courtyard. But on his last shift, during a heavy rain, something changed. The museum was nearly silent except for the steady patter against the windows. While making his rounds, he heard it, another set of footsteps echoing faintly down the eastern corridor. Not hurried, not hesitant, just steady, deliberate, following his own pace. He called out, thinking it was his partner doing a double check. No answer. When he reached the end of the hall and turned, the corridor was empty. But the footsteps continued for 3 more beats before stopping abruptly, as though whoever or whatever was there had just realized he'd noticed. Uneasy, he radioed his partner, who swore he was in a different wing entirely. He decided to cut the round short and headed toward the main foyer. Passing the statue of Poppæa, he swore he caught the faint scent of sandalwood, impossible in the damp, cold air. That was when the footsteps started again, this time directly behind him. Closer, closer. He didn't look back. He simply walked out into the rain, tossed his security badge into the gutter, and never returned to the building. The replacement guard lasted only 2 weeks.